Welcome everyone to the Quality and Patient Safety session number 5 on recommendations to improve patient safety from APSF's Multi-Center Handover Collaborative. My name is Philip Greilich. I'm a professor of anesthesiology and pain management at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center in Dallas, and I'll be chairing this session. As the chair of the Multi-Center Handover Collaborative, it's my great pleasure to be with you and our speakers today. I would like to thank our track chair, Dr. Kahn, and co-chairs, Dr. Whitaker and Koch, for their invitation, and Dr. Warner for APSF's sponsorship of this session. We have an outstanding panel of experts who will address how learning collaboratives can accelerate complex socio-technical change. Dr. Leanne Riesenberg, my co-chair, is a professor and associate director of education at the University of Alabama. She will introduce our speakers and objectives and review some ground rules for today's session.
Good morning, everyone. Our first speaker will be Dr. Andreas Koldehoff from Ruhr Universität Bochum, Germany. He will review the evidence base supporting the use of structured perioperative handoffs and care transitions for improving outcomes. I will address the importance of multimodal, multi-level handoff education in sustaining handoff change. Dr. Joseph Keebler from Embry-Riddle University will help us understand how to apply human factors and ergonomics to handoff redesign and implementation. And then Dr. Bommy Hong-Mershon from Johns Hopkins will share how to engage electronic medical record vendors to accelerate the development of handoff tools and cognitive aids. A few ground rules. Please set your computers to mute during the presentation. If you have questions, please place them in the chat box. I will be monitoring that and to use during our question and answer session after the 4 presentations. Our presenters will be in the networking room after this session and will provide their names and email addresses should you have questions after the session and the networking are over. Our first speaker is Dr. Andreas Koldehoff.
Well, hello, and a very warm welcome to this lecture. My name is Andreas Koldehoff. I'm part of the team of the Department of Anaesthesiology at the Heart and Diabetes Center in Bad Oeynhausen, Germany, and I'm very pleased to hold this lecture about the current evidence for the impact of structured perioperative handoffs. So our topic is, do structured perioperative handoffs improve outcome? What's the evidence? I did this lecture together with my boss, Vera von Dosso. In the last 2 decades, parts of the medical faculties have turned to other high-risk industries in terms of their self-image, and thus they adopted rules and behaviors from these areas. They implemented checklists, safety standard operating procedures, and they shifted the focus to human factors as a key element to increase patient safety and avoid adverse events. There are publications which clearly classify parts of the medical work environments as high-risk areas. And clearly, since a statement of the Joint Commission in 2004, which did a root cause analysis for adverse events, the focus shifted even more so to communication, interprofessional communication errors as reasons for adverse events. I think you all know this Swiss cheese model, and this all led to repeated recommendations by the WHO and the Joint Commission to implement standardized communication tools like perioperative checklist, team timeouts, structured handoffs, the SBAR concept, to increase patient safety, to reach an effective communication within the healthcare teams, and thus to avoid adverse events. So what's the evidence? Since 2004, publications about this topic have increased significantly. So we have now about 1,000 articles published in the usual databases. And I would like to present you 3 systematic reviews, 2 of them published this June by the team of Joanna Abrams from the Washington Medical School. So let's dive right in. The first systematic review Joanna Abrams published this year included 32 studies, which were definitely differently designed. Here she focused on handoff interventions from the OR to the ICU. These weren't single interventions like implementing one checklist. It was always bundled interventions. So they changed the communication, the checklist, or protocols altogether. What they could show is an improvement in time to analgesia, fewer information omissions, fewer technical errors, and greater information sharing scores. To give you a bit of background to these studies, most of them were conducted within a pediatric environment. And these results have to be taken with a grain of salt, since the authors point out that the quality assessments, which was done here via the Downs and Black checklist, clearly showed that by and large the evidence was weak. Studies had big difficulties within their study design. It was usually a pre-post design, non-randomized, non-blinded, and they didn't check or adjust for the usual set of biases which occur here. It was a small sample size usually, so the power calculation wasn't done at all, or if it was done retrospectively, the studies were underpowered and they had problems in the reporting. So the quality assessment clearly showed a lack of high quality studies here, which lead to a questionable external validity of the results. A summary of the results in terms of meta-analysis was hampered due to the high statistical and clinical heterogeneity of the studies. Only the time to analgesia dosing in a pediatric setting could be shown here in the meta-analysis. The second systematic review, which focused on intraoperative handovers, included 14 studies, 5 prospective, 9 retrospective. The quality assessment was done by the Newcastle Ottawa scale here for non-randomized studies. Looking at the retrospective studies, a positive finding was that they focused on patient-relevant outcomes like morbidity and mortality. And most of the studies found an improvement of mortality and morbidity after implementing a structured patient handover within the intraoperative setting. Only one study found no difference between structured or unstructured patient handover. But here again, the studies differed wildly, and we concluded low evidence due to statistical and clinical heterogeneity. The authors weren't able to conduct a meta-analysis as a consequence. Looking at the prospective cohort studies included in this systematic review, one of the biggest limitations was that there was no adverse outcome measurement. So no patient-relevant outcome was measured. They focused on the communication improvements within the healthcare teams. To give you an example for the heterogeneity of these studies, the setting was differently in terms of the implementation of the intervention. They did it via mail, or they did it via participant training. Some focused on permanent handoffs, some focused on non-permanent handoffs where the anesthesiologists came back to the OR. So the meta-analysis and a comprehensive result out of these very differing studies was not possible. The positive findings of these prospective cohort studies were an improved information transfer and an increase in provider satisfaction, high rate of tool use, and certain sustainability of the new standardized communications tool, which was implemented. Again, these results have to be taken cautiously since the evidence is low, and the prospective studies were even rated lower than the retrospective studies. The third and last systematic review I would like to present you focuses on the SBAR tool, which was propagated by the WHO. Martin Müller and colleagues published in 2018 this systematic review, including 11 studies, which focused on patient-relevant outcome, which was a positive thing, but again showed a lot of flaws, and overall study quality was found to be weak. Improvement in font communication was actually the main result. We again have to state that the evidence for the SBAR tool is low due to the lack of high-quality studies. This brings us to our summary. Structured perioperative handovers, due to the current literature, are not inferior to unstructured handoffs. The studies on this topic differ greatly from each other in form and content, which makes an overarching summary of the results impossible. No effects of structured perioperative handovers on patient-relevant outcomes have been observed so far, for example, time on mechanical intervention or handoff duration or transitional ordering time. However, there was often a high level of satisfaction among users, a perceived improvement in team performance, and a certain sustainability of the introduction of structured handovers. For the perspective, it is first important to improve the data on this topic. The implementation and reporting of these social technical interventions is not trivial and needs increased knowledge level in the design and execution of these studies. In addition, the focus should be placed more on patient-relevant outcomes than on the communication within the teams. Furthermore, a one-fits-all strategy might not lead to the goal of a wide adoption of structured communication within the perioperative setting. Instead, an individual information bundle adapted to the location and situation might be a better way if it is formulated and applied area-specifically in order to ensure structured communication, a good communication within the team, and the most error-free patient transfer possible, and thus increase patient safety. Thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer your questions now.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Koldehoff. Okay, so our next speaker will be Dr. Leanne Riesenberg.
Hello, my name is Leanne Riesenberg. I'm a professor and associate director of education in the Anaesthesiology and Perioperative Medicine department at UAB. I'll be talking to you about the role of multimodal, multi-level handoff education in building handoff competency and sustaining handoff change. I have a great team that's been working for the past 2 years on reviewing the literature on handoff curriculum studies. This team includes Elle Kaplan, Gracie Ernstberger, Joshua Davis, and Emma Hagen. We have no actual or potential conflict of interest, no commercial support for this session, but we have received funding from my department. There's a lot in the title, and this title is particularly complex. So I want to break my talk into 4 components: handoff competence, sustaining handoff change. Then I want to talk about the roles of multimodal education and multi-level education. Let's start with handoff competence. We know a great deal about competency-based education, and in GME, we've been working with and studying milestones and EPAs for quite some time. Let's look more closely at EPAs and handoffs in particular. First of all, what is an EPA? It's a unit of professional practice defined as tasks or responsibilities that trainees are entrusted to perform unsupervised. That is, once they've achieved sufficient specific competence. In 2014, the AAMC established giving and receiving handoffs as a core EPA for entering residents. And we've long been required by the ACGME to provide residents, fellows, and faculty with handoff training. In addition, there's some work that's already been done with EPAs and handoffs very specifically. NCATE has shown that achieving entrustment in an EPA requires years of practice, and I think that's particularly important for handoffs. He's also described that handoffs require proficiency or mastery in numerous competency domains. The provider needs a solid knowledge base. They need to understand the care that was provided to the patient that they're handing off. They'll need to be able to communicate effectively and in a professional manner, and they'll need to understand the system in which they practice. Moving on, let's talk about sustaining handoff change. We have a great deal of data to help us answer this question. It comes from the IPASS study group. IPASS is a handoff mnemonic, and the IPASS group started working in 2010 when they established their multi-site studies. Since then, they've published over 20 studies of the IPASS mnemonic bundle implementation. In 2013 and 14, they published in JAMA and the New England Journal of Medicine, where they showed dramatic improvements in actual handoffs, and they were able to reduce medical errors and reduce preventable adverse events. However, improvements have been difficult to maintain. Numerous studies have shown this, and I wanted to point out two in particular. Hughes et al. Showed that resident handoff behaviors are different when they're not being observed. This isn't especially surprising. We all know about the Hawthorne effect. What is surprising to me, though, is that this was a self-report study. The residents freely admitted that when they weren't being observed, they weren't using all of the IPASS mnemonic components. And then more recently, Tufts et al. Showed that re-education is required to sustain change. So let me summarize what I think is required. Sustaining handoff change, I believe, requires sustained effort. We'll need a campaign of handoff change. We'll need to use a quality or process improvement model with an iterative approach to handoff change with different interventions over time. We'll have to have culture change. We'll need re-education. And that won't just be a didactic. It will also include skills practice, feedback, and likely a memory aid. We'll need to embed the handoff tool in the electronic medical record. We'll need to protocolize this change, and we'll need a commitment to long-term improvement efforts. Moving on, let's talk about the role of multimodal education. Education theory encourages us to use multiple education strategies. In our review of handoff curriculum studies, we found that those that achieve actual handoff improvements include multimodal education. Going all the way back to 2008, the first study that we've found with handoff curriculum studied, Bergenstadt et al. Use a multimodal bundle of handoff education, and they were able to establish statistically significant handoff skills improvement. In 2012, Bump et al. Conducted an internal medicine resident study. In this study, they had two groups, a control group and an intervention group. Both groups received lecture, handout, and a mnemonic. The intervention group, in addition, had twice a month faculty evaluation and feedback. The intervention group achieved statistically significant improvements in handoff content and summary scores when compared to the control group. In 2017, Fryman et al. Conducted a quality improvement study. In their first phase, they implemented a mnemonic only. They got some modest changes, but then they needed to move on to phase 2, where they implemented a multimodal handoff education bundle. They had early successes, great data. However, by 6 months, improvements were declining. So they moved on to phase 3, where they implemented weekly direct observation, feedback, and compliance reports sent to the internal medicine residents in this study. We believe that skills practice and feedback are essential components of a handoff education strategy. Finally, what do we know about the role of multi-level education? In our review of published handoff curriculum studies, most studies measure process change. However, some have included patient outcomes. Of studies with patient outcome measures, the majority that have been able to demonstrate a statistically significant improvement in patient outcomes have included multiple levels of learners in their intervention. DeWare et al. Included all of the family medicine residents, and they were able to reduce medical errors. Crowell et al. Included all the internal medicine residents, and they found patients requiring rapid response team intervention had fewer required handoff elements. And Yang et al. Conducted a postoperative handoff improvement study where they included interdisciplinary individuals across the postoperative care setting, including the anesthesia residents. They were able to decrease mechanical ventilation duration. In conclusion, we've come a long way since the Joint Commission established handoffs as a national patient safety goal in 2006. We've established handoffs as an entrustable professional activity requiring mastery in multiple competency domains. And I believe today that I've demonstrated the need for sustained iterative focus on handoff improvements. And we've talked about the growing evidence base that supports the need for multimodal and multi-level handoff education. And this education should be provided over time. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Leanne, especially for unpacking that 4-component title for us today. All right, so for our next lecture, it'll be Dr. Joseph Keebler will be our speaker.
Good afternoon, my name is Joe Keebler, and today I'm going to be talking to you about application of human factors and ergonomics to handoff redesign implementation. I have a PhD in psychology from the University of Central Florida with a focus on teams, especially in high-risk systems and high technical systems. So I have a little bit of human factors background, but also a teamwork background, and so I study usually teams in risky contexts where they are working together with some kind of advanced technology. I've been studying the science of handoff since 2012, and I've been applying both human factor science and team science to this problem space for a while now. Just as a refresher for those of you who might not know, human factors is the scientific discipline that's concerned with understanding interactions amongst humans and other elements of a system, and the profession that applies theory, principles, data, and methods to design in order to optimize human well-being and overall system performance. So my question today is, how do we apply the science of human factors specifically to improve the system surrounding handoffs or handovers, transitions of care, etc.? First, we have to kind of look at handoffs as a team activity. It's impossible to apply human factors in this context without understanding the team surrounding this work. And we know teamwork is crucial to patient safety. There's evidence that team training can improve patient morbidity by as much as 15%. And as medicine grows in complexity, teams are the core work unit and are facing ever increasing amounts of technology integration, human systems integration into complex organizations that current healthcare systems are. So care transitions and handoffs are teamwork. It's usually 2 or more individuals working together interdependently towards some shared goal. They share and update information with one another. They share their mental models regarding patient status, and they exchange responsibility from each other or to one team to another team. There's many teamwork processes and constructs that could be involved in handovers. I've identified 4 that I think are critical to good handoffs. I'm going to review these very quickly and describe kind of how they are integral to handoffs and kind of what the best practices are surrounding them. So first is the act of communication, which is sharing information between individuals, either verbally or non-verbally. And usually this is to update information, mental models, or to perform some task. Handoffs should be clear and concise and interactive, and they should use closed-loop communication, which means that everyone performs readbacks and acknowledges information shared. Usually they should have one person speaking at a time and taking turns to effectively not interrupt each other, and always leave time for question and answering. Leadership is the second construct, and this is the act of providing resources and coaching to ensure a team can reach its goals. It's important that leaders establish a tone for blame-free communication during handoffs. They act as a role model. They model a perfect handoff to others and show people how they should be handing off effectively to their colleagues. And they understand the importance of sharing leadership, because as a handoff occurs, the leadership and authority, at least concerning a patient, might pass off to the next team. So as the handoff is occurring, this leadership exchange is also occurring. And I think that being salient and paying attention to that is an important component of effectively conducting handoffs. Third is coordination, which is the organization of elements of a team to achieve an effective outcome. This might include aspects as having all team members present during handoffs, including a engineered in readback to make sure that people are providing information to each other at critical times and providing the right information at the right time. Interactive communication, kind of as I spoke about already. And that the handoff isn't over, the handoff isn't over, handover is not finished until receiver is ready. Finally, there's the decision-making involved with handoffs, active using cues to choose a course of action. And it's important here that the individuals conducting the handoff have a plan of action that is agreed upon between them and is understood clearly between them, and also understanding the patient complexity and severity in regards to the handoff tasks and follow-up tasks after the handoff is concluded. Now that we understand the teamwork surrounding handoffs and that it's a team activity, how do we contextualize it within the greater system of the units and hospitals and healthcare organizations that you all work in? So just looking at the teams themselves isn't enough, because there are broader constraints based on organizational elements, training, tasking of individuals, the kinds of tools used. And we contextualize this through what's called the systems engineering and patient safety model. This comes out of Pascal Carrion's work. So here we want to look at the left side work system, and specifically those 5 items in the circle there. And these influence some of the processes I described earlier. So we have kind of 5 things to consider as we're looking at handoffs in our organizations. First is what tools and technologies are in the system, what devices and systems are being used by the provider teams, what tasks and work processes are they involved in, what are the rules and resources provided by the organization to support handoffs, who are the individuals and teams involved in handoffs, and what is the physical layout and room design, and how does that affect handoffs? Are there quiet rooms to conduct handoffs in? Are they being done out in the open where they can be interrupted very readily? These all must be considered to properly engineer handoffs within your own work systems. So here's an integrated model from some work I conducted a couple of years ago. And what I've done is I've taken those 5 input variables from the SEEPS model, and I've kept those here. I put them on the left. But then in the middle, I put in the team mediators, because again, handoffs are a team task. And so I think it's important to understand that these 5 left side variables, these inputs, influence how well the teams conducting handoffs can communicate, lead, coordinate, and make decisions about patients. And then those lead to downstream effects on the patient, on the providers themselves, and on the organization. So let's take a deeper dive on one of these. I don't have time to talk about all 5, but I want to talk about tools, because of all the things we've studied in handoffs as a science for these last 10 or 20 years, checklists and protocols and cognitive aids have kind of been a centerpiece of handoffs. And so I think it's important that we visit this from a kind of human factors perspective. So some of the tools involved in handoffs might include checklists and protocols, mnemonic devices like SBAR and IPASS, and the EMRs that information is put into. As an example, I provided a couple of checklists and protocols here. On the left side, we have SBAR, which stands for Situation Background Assessment Recommendation. In the middle, we have IPASS, which stands for Illness, Severity, Patient Summary, Action List, Situation Awareness, Contingency Planning, and Synthesis by Receiver. And on the right, we have a protocol that actually my team made for a grant we won a couple years ago called the Flex 11 that was made for pediatric handoffs as well. And this describes 11 categories, including demographics, patient summary, labs and tests, etc. And what I want to show you here is that even though we have superordinate categorical differences like SBAR and IPASS or Flex 11, in the details of these, there's a lot of similarities. And one of the things we've been studying is what is the most relevant information for a handoff? What needs to be in the protocol? And how many items should there be and how should they be grouped? It seems like a simple question, but these are extremely complex questions actually, in the sense of how do we best make a protocol for a specific unit or type of handoff or individual, and how do we engineer it into the system? How do we get people to buy into it and use it? Are they even effective? These are questions we're still asking and trying to answer. It seems that they are, but how effective can they be? How do we integrate them into EMRs? Are they always used? How do we fit them into the work system? These are questions I ask as a human factor scientist. There's been proposed over 35 mnemonic devices by Riesenberg 2009, and I'm sure this has doubled since then. And again, are these enough? What's the difference between them? Do we need to be comparing them to each other to find the best one, or do we engineer one for our own individual units? So there's more work that needs to be done. We need to understand other variables that surround the handoff and how they relate to the effectiveness of the care transition. These might include things like team familiarity, hierarchies and power distance in the units, organizational constraints. Organizations that can put money into handoffs are going to have more effective handoffs and better outcomes than organizations that cannot. So how do we do this at a cost-effective level? How do we integrate better science into handoffs when maybe we don't have a budget for it, right? And how do we convince higher ups in our organizations to budget for this? Some areas of improvement for handoffs include context and patient-specific protocols. Do we design protocols and checklists around each patient? Do we have some kind of adaptive system that makes a protocol per patient or per handoff? Should we compare protocols to one another to find which ones are best? Is creating a protocol in-house, grassroots creation of protocols, better than using pre-manufactured protocols? Should we adopt protocols that exist? Should we adopt them and re-engineer them in our own units, or should we make them from scratch? Understanding organizational trade-offs between the time commitment to doing a good handoff and the time that providers are spending on a variety of other tasks already. Using money and funds to improve handoffs and teamwork. These are questions organizations need to ask themselves. And as you as providers and maybe leaders in your own organizations, you put handoffs at the forefront of safety. And then measuring outcomes. Handoffs are inconsistently measured across the science. A lot of meta-analytic evidence demonstrates that studies don't measure the same outcomes. And so how do we standardize this across our science and our units and hospitals to better understand how does handoff improvement efforts lead to better outcomes for our patients, for our bottom line, and for our providers' well-being? And where HFE and teamwork appear to be critical here and for improving handoffs in your units are on these 5 facets. Minimizing interruptions through redesign of the tasking and maybe location of where handoffs are occurring. Through educating younger and younger generations. So let's go to medical students and educate them on how to do handoffs. Maybe even pre-med students are learning how to do handoffs. This wasn't something that was taught in medical school even maybe 5 or 10 years ago, but it's starting to be. And it probably needs to be because it's mainly something that's learned on the job. And at that point, errors can occur. It's almost too late. Design and analyze handoff protocols, checklists, other cognitive aids. What is the best design? How do we make better designs as we have better technologies moving into the future? How do we integrate current technologies and checklists into our EMRs to reduce the amount of time spent by providers on entering information into EMRs? Engineering physical spaces to make them conducive for communication is another facet. And finally, handoff documentation, EMR integration. This is related to design analysis protocols, but how do we integrate the system of teams and individuals to best spend the least amount of time doing menial tasks and the most amount of time focused on the conversations integral to patient safety? Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Joe, for that excellent presentation, and underscores the importance of viewing handoffs in the context of teamwork. It's great to have human factors scientists in this, and your questions really helped us frame the road ahead. Our final speaker will be Dr. Bommy Hong-Mershon.
Hello, everyone. My name is Bommy Hong-Mershon. I'm a pediatric anesthesiologist at Johns Hopkins and a member of the MHC's EMR workgroup. I'm honored to share about the exciting work of the Multi-Center Handoff Collaborative, specifically about how we were able to accelerate development, integration, and adoption of an electronic intraoperative handoff tool available to all users of this particular electronic medical record program across the world through collaborative partnerships. Those of us in the MHC, and I'm sure many of you, have faced the dilemma of trying to design and implement a solution to complex healthcare processes, such as a standardized handoff tool in the EMR to help with handoffs, but have been unsuccessful because of limitations of resources, time, and programming capabilities. Even though a majority of our hospitals in the United States use the same EMR system, many of us had to essentially reinvent the wheel at our own local hospitals over and over again. We were all working in silos, having to start from scratch, without access to what other groups had built or were doing. We were all at different stages with different builds. We also had parts of our locally designed tools that were less than ideal, but our local EMR programmers faced competing priorities from other issues that needed to be addressed, as well as limitations in capability of making changes at the local level. They were also limited in their permission to make changes and often needed to keep pushing requests up the chain, which increased delays. And these were just a few of the obstacles that many of us faced. Before I delve into the specifics of how this dilemma was resolved, let's take a step back and review the fancy term called macroergonomics. What is macroergonomics? Dr. Hal Hendrick, the father of macroergonomics, defined it as a top-down systems approach to work system design and the carry-through to the design of jobs, hardware, and software, or, put it another way, a field of science that concentrates on designing overall work systems by providing the knowledge and methods necessary for the improvement of work systems, and thus developing the effectiveness and performance of companies. And conceptually, philosophically, this is exactly how our multi-center handoff collaborative approaches this complex problem of perioperative handoffs, and how we also approached the specific dilemma of designing a universal electronic standardized intraoperative handoff tool and accelerating its adoption. And the secret to our success is what's termed cross-boundary collaboration. And this is what we took advantage of. CBC occurs when a group of interdependent actors or experts in different industries interact to solve a collective task. For collaboration to happen, however, it requires coordination, which is the alignment of these experts' actions toward accomplishing that collective goal. Coordinated actions are essential to deliver high quality and efficient healthcare, because insufficient coordination means specialists and experts cannot leverage their combined expertise efficiently. And if you'd like to learn more about this concept, please check out the paper by Praetorius that's listed here and on the reference page. So let's dig a little deeper into applying coordinated cross-boundary collaboration. From a human factors engineering perspective, there are 4 phases in any healthcare system redesign: analysis, design, implementation, and evaluation, which are highlighted in yellow. And specific applications for each of these phases are highlighted in red. And this is also how we approached solving our dilemma. Before I get into the details of our story, I wanted to be the first to share that we are so excited that our story will be soon hot off the press in the Applied Clinical Informatics Journal at the time of this recording. So now let's get down to our real-life success story. First, here's a brief timeline of our work. A group of like-minded anesthesiologists with a passion for improving perioperative handoffs met at the American Society for Anesthesiology National Conference in 2015 and catalyzed the formation of the Multi-Center Handoff Collaborative. From there, they worked tirelessly at the local and national levels and again formed another partnership with the Anesthesia Patient Safety Foundation, which resulted in the APSF hosting a perioperative handoff consensus conference in 2017. This expanded the MHC's reach to important industry high-level experts within Epic, the predominant EMR system used by many hospitals in the U.S., such as programmers and physicians on the Epic Steering Board. This steering board is a group of physicians who help to direct EMR content and development for each specialty and advocates for support to improve the end-user handoff experience. When the board agreed that a handoff tool was needed, Epic assigned a team to meet with representatives from the 7 different institutions in the EMR workgroup. Through these collaborative partnerships, we then coordinated an EMR handoff workgroup, which met monthly for about 2 years to analyze, design, and implement an intraoperative handoff tool that would be available to all users of Epic and be customizable at the local level. Verbal and written surveys were conducted over several months to reach consensus on critical handoff elements. In subsequent meetings, members discussed various design and workflow decisions, including click reduction and incorporation of other mandatory documentation. The work timeline spanned from the September 2017 APSF conference through the August 2019 distribution of the first handoff tool in Epic. Once the goals were established, the vendor conducted a gap analysis between the existing EMR functionality and the functionality envisioned for the final product. These gaps were combined with an estimate of programming time to generate a project development list. Over several months, about 7 months, Epic created a workflow and built a report that met most of the group's requests. The report was then subjected to the EMR's routine internal quality assurance systems, including prototype build, end-user testing, 2 rounds of code review, 2 rounds of internal testing, steering committee and internal leadership review, and several-month holding period to validate stability and performance. And voila, through our partnership with Epic, we released the first version in a little under 2 years from our first collaborative meeting, which is quite an accelerated achievement at such a high level. Remember, most of us had been working at our local institutions for several years before we were able to launch a tool just to be used within our own institution. The first released version was quite pared down from all the details and elements our workgroup ultimately desired due to the programming requirements, as Epic wanted to release only fully vetted elements that worked. The second version was released about 6 months later, which included more of the important elements that we had designed. Because of our partnership with high-level programmers within Epic, they were able to unlock more capability to maximize display of pertinent information while excluding less important data elements and minimizing white space. We were all amazed at not only the rate and efficiency of progress through our collaboration, but also the capability that exceeded what our local programmers could do. This was only possible through the magic of coordinated cross-boundary collaboration between EMR industry experts and the healthcare industry experts within the field of anesthesiology. I hope I was able to highlight in real life that solutions to complex healthcare processes can be achieved, and quickly too, when we get out of our silos and fields of expertise and bring everyone to the table. And everything I've presented is a fancy way of quoting John C. Maxwell, who once wrote, "Teamwork makes the dream work." Thank you so much.
Outstanding, Bommy. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. So I think we are going to be entering the question and answer period. And I don't know. get the whole panel up. And encourage, of course, those to submit their questions, which I believe is shown by the question mark in the sort of upper right-hand portion of your screen. Dr. Riesenberg and I will be adding some questions as we go, and we'll like to take the audience lead on this. Perhaps to get things started, I might begin with a question for Dr. Koldehoff. Certainly, it seems as if the quality of the current evidence, I think you characterize as not inferior to unstructured handoff, would support those who do not necessarily want to change their behavior by performing a more structured handoff. Given the need to build a stronger evidence base by addressing the, quote, statistical and clinical heterogeneity, quote, in perioperative handoff research, what recommendations do you have for standardizing, either the interventions, the design, or the measurements, let's say, for the next generation of handoff studies?
Yeah, that's kind of it. So we need standardized metrics for evaluating handoffs in prospective and retrospective studies. We should rather focus on proximal handoff metrics like in-hospital morbidity and mortality, on ICU admission, unplanned extubation, something like that, rather than focusing on 30-day mortality and morbidity. We need standardized instruments and validated instruments to collect the relevant outcomes, since in the studies I now saw, the people who evaluated the communication did it on their own developed checklists. So this is questionable in terms of external validity. We need robust study designs. That means large sample sizes, prospective randomized trials or cluster randomized trials, control groups, since the prospective studies in one systematic review didn't have any control groups within the pre or post intervention groups, which makes them less valuable than the retrospective studies in this systematic review. And the question Joe Keebler stated is a really important one. What are the core content elements for the high quality handoffs? That's something, we still don't know. What should be in there? Is it really area specific, or is there some elements which we really all need to know about the patient during a patient handoff? We need to rule out all the biases that we can have: a selection bias, the information bias, the Simpson's paradox, and stuff. So it is a really complex thing to measure, and you need the standardized metrics, and you need carefully designed studies to actually to show what we all feel. We all feel it is working, it is improving communication within the healthcare teams. It feels better, but we don't have the evidence yet. So I think that these are the points I should recommend for further studies.
It certainly sounds like challenging work to do alone, as an individual, or certainly as a single institution.
Yeah.
Dr. Koldehoff, I have a follow-up question. One of your final conclusions was to use flexible standardization, and we don't have much data to support standardization. But if we're going to move toward flexible standardization, there's a skill set then. How do you think educators should approach teaching learners to develop the skills necessary to effectively adapt handoff structure in the different situations?
Actually, I don't know. Since the studies all used different types of implementation, sometimes they just sent an email. Sometimes they did like focus groups, and they did it as shown in the other presentations, top down. That from leadership and a campaign, as you said, within the whole team. I can't actually say how to do it. As you said, it needs a long breath. It's like a marathon. You need a lot of time, and you have to perpetuate the whole learning cycle. The team changes. People are leaving. People are coming. But the institution itself or the organization itself should have like centers or pinpoints where everybody learns the things important, like structured handoffs. The organization feels to be important.
So an ongoing plan.
Yeah, it is. And ongoing training. It is not done via. We do this for once, and this holds like a half a year or 1 year, and then the team changes. You should do it like every year, a training. We do it here in Bad Oeynhausen, but it is even with a small team here with like 30 anesthesiologists. It's very difficult to implement and to keep it steady.
Yeah, I think Leanne's talk sort of underscores the need for longitudinal education. I think even Joe was even saying, maybe you got to get them young, right? and really, it is to do handoffs means you almost need to begin viewing it as team work competencies or team competencies, and like, oh, what are those competencies, right? And when we think about the fact that it's going to be sustained over time, I think that's where we have to, I think there's efforts ongoing, right, to start looking there. Start them young. What are those competencies? So as they get to the respective hospital units and they have these different looks that are tailored, they'll still understand the core behaviors.
Right. You get them young or get them right at the start of their working in this organization. Like, this is how we communicate. This is the information bundle we talk about when we transfer patient from one area to another. Get them young or get them early. Yeah, right.
Excellent. All right. So other questions that might have come in? We certainly think Leanne and I both have a couple additional for others. I thought I had one for Joe next. As you said, teamwork appears to be at the heart of handoffs. And, one of the missing pieces as a clinician working on this for a while was, the skill set that comes with human factors and ergonomic scientists, right, with expertise in the constructs and the models needed to guide and measure the impact of handoff redesign. You, Andreas, underscored the need for these standardizing the outcomes. Can you provide us with some examples from your work and meta-analyses, perhaps on some of the more important metrics for us to keep in mind as we go forward?
Sure, Philip. And I think Andres touched on a couple, like the morbidity, mortality, patient outcomes. But I think it's important to look at it at a couple levels. You want to look at provider outcomes, and those could be things like how they are reacting to the training systems, how they're reacting to their cognitive aids, and measuring that and using that as a kind of litmus test for how effective the bundles are, or how effective the training systems are that they're going through, and how much they like using their protocol. You want to look at patient outcomes, length of stay, health outcomes for individual patients, and morbidity, mortality, and then you want to look at organizational outcomes. And that's one thing, as I hear you guys talk about standardization, I agree. But we also know that there's a lot of constraints from organizations in regards to what they want to see. And so I think it's a balancing act between standardizing so that we can benchmark against other research, but also having a plethora of things we can study and measure that are important to individual organizations. I don't know what that balance looks like, but some things that come to mind also from my world are things like workload, situation awareness, learning and measuring learning outcomes in regards to what people know and what we think they know, using that as a way to benchmark what needs to change in the system. But I think it's important to always look at organizational elements and measure those, patient and provider elements, and have something measuring each of those. I hope that answered your question.
Mm-hmm. Other thoughts? Yeah, one thing we started looking at is, if nothing else, because I think Leanne underscored, like, this is kind of iterative in its nature, is that, to our outcome list, we've been adding implementation outcomes, right? And there's some leading indicators and lagging indicators. I mean, everyone's very much focused on or aware of the lagging indicators like clinical outcomes, certainly morbidity and mortality. But we've all seen, or that have attempted any of these changes, that some of it's better, but other parts of it, not as much. So the idea that you would look at things like acceptability,
Sure.
appropriateness, right? Feasibility, on your way to fidelity.
Another
and,
sorry, Paul. There's a lot of studies that measure the quality of the handoff, and sometimes it's done live. As a psychologist who studies live teams, live measurement is very challenging. And so I think there's probably some ways to improve. How do we assess how well that handoff went, regardless of patient outcomes and provider feedback? The teamwork during that handoff was excellent or not, right? And measuring that's very, very difficult. And I think a lot of it is done through live observation, but video recording these kinds of conversations and coding them after the fact could be very useful. There might be other ways to analyze people's behavior as a team while the handoff is being conducted, and that's something that is not studied very well.
Very good, thank you. I see there are some questions now in the chat. Craig Webster says, outcome measures are obviously important, as is good quality data, but outcomes won't come right if processes aren't right, such as teamwork. Also, education interventions are poorly assessed with randomized controlled trials, sort of type studies. What about mixed methods assessment?
Yeah, that's actually what they are trying to do. It's quite difficult to do a randomized control trial with this kind of field. You can try. Usually they use a pre-post design. What you need with a pre-post design, you need a control, some kind of that you have something to say now it's better. If it's just the people who are working within the field, you have the selection bias. Who's recruiting? Who is recruited? Are they only the people who actually are fond of this whole thing of structured communication? You need to rule out these biases. Otherwise, it's like the egg and the hen. Of course, you need teamwork to have a good outcome, and you need, usually if you have good outcomes, you have good teamwork, but we don't know that for sure. So again, it's put all the biases aside and try to do it via large sample sizes and controls. Then you can use, of course, non-randomized trials as well. Sure.
Right, great. You've actually answered a second question that was about how randomized controlled trials are our gold standard.
Yeah, sure.
But they're not necessarily the best thing when measuring.
No, then we're not. We're only trying to reach the truth, and we need best data we have. But with the data we have now, we can't be that sure that it's actually improving patient-relevant outcomes as much as we feel, as we would like it to be. But we need better studies for that.
Newer designs are starting to emerge using quasi-experimental cluster step wedge. I think that's
step wedge and
a little more the
right.
direction things are likely heading, to bring some of those controls and to minimize some of the biases that plague what I call like maybe first generation studies as we kind of prepare for the next. I had a follow-up question for Leanne. Handoff education appears to require not only the development of new skills and competencies by the learner, but as you said, a system and a culture that supports a sustained and coordinated effort over the time. Given the amount of time and effort it takes for the learner to gain and integrate skills needed for good handoffs into their practice, do you think there is an opportunity to better align the EPAs for undergraduate education with those for graduate medical education, improve this longitudinal curriculum?
Great question. Thank you. So we know that undergraduates are getting exposed to handoffs more and more. They self-report that the majority of them had some handoff education during medical school. However, a small percentage of them only is receiving skills practice. And while they know that handoffs are important and they know that there are bad outcomes from inadequate handoffs, what they're lacking is skills practice, direct observation, feedback, on an ongoing basis. We are at an ideal moment in time when the new anesthesia milestones have just come out. We're all doing our evaluation systems to incorporate the new milestones. This is a perfect opportunity for us to build effective observation, feedback, evaluation of handoffs on an ongoing basis. So they've already got the didactic, and most of the time we start with didactic and GME, but I'm not sure we need that. We need more skills practice, feedback, and ongoing strengthening of the skill set that the learners need. So I think there is a great opportunity for us to build on what the students are coming into our systems with. Thank you.
All right, so I think we're at time. I love to get Bommy on here to, highlight some of the advantages of being part of a learning collaborative, certainly as exemplified by the rapid period in which they made access to an intraoperative anesthesia record nationwide and I guess globally. There is a opportunity for networking, and I think the speakers are prepared to join you there. I certainly hope you will. I wanted to take this opportunity to thank our speakers and sponsors and the viewing audience for joining us here today. The way to, as I understand it, and you guys correct me if I got this wrong, to find their way to the networking is to go back to, a matter of fact, I'm going to hand it to Bommy. I think you had the best grasp on steering us, was it to the main page? Was that it?
Yep. If you go to the main page at the bottom right, there's a box that says networking. And if you click on that, you can put your name in there.
And is it the name you would put for the session?
I think
Bommy?
you put your own name and then you hit continue, and it looks like, yeah, you can join or find people who are in that session.
Right. It's networking and Prague Plaza is what it looks like. All right. I want to thank everybody for their time and attention today,
Thank you.
and all the speakers for the time and effort put in to prepare these. Our hope is to post this material on the MHC's Multi-Center Handover Collaborative's website, so that it might be reviewed and in this really outstanding information made widely available. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Hope to
Leanne.
see you in the networking. Thank you.
Nice to meet you, Andreas and Bommy.
Yeah.
Likewise, Andre. Take
Thanks.
care, guys.
Bye-bye.
Hope to see you.